Back on Morning Drive as we prepare for the final round of the Memorial Tournament at Muirfield Village. We take a look back some historic moments from this date in history that occurred at Muirfield Golf Links. Yes, the Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers. First in 87, Nick Faldo, 18 consecutive pars in the final round to win the Open. Good enough for a one-stroke win over Roger Davis and Paul Azinger. Then in 92, back again, and he joins James Braid as the second player to win two Opens at Muirfield. The win also moved Faldo to number one in the official World Golf Rankings, the spot he would hold for 81 weeks. In total, just under 100 in his career as we talk about John Rahm today. And when you consider, and of course, John Cook took today off because he beat John by a shot, his career, Hall of Fame, obviously worthy, greenlit right into St. Augustine, three-time Open champion, three-time Masters champion, 30 European Tour wins, a European Ryder Cup captain, not victorious in 08 at Valhalla, the 1990 PGA of America Player of the Year, the 2014 Payne Stewart Award recipient, and of course, the longtime lead analyst for CBS's golf coverage, and of course, a big contributor for Golf Channel as well. You know, Jaime, his place in history is interesting for a host of reasons. Not only in the world ranking era with the advent of it in '86, and here he comes along and wins his first major in '87, but also the introduction of the star instructor in lockstep with the student. Where, if you try to assess him all time, where do you start?
Well, I mean, just historically, put him in, the second 10 of all-time greats. And Nick did it after doing probably the biggest, at least most publicized swing renovation anybody had ever seen. And it sort of set a model, he and David Ledbetter working with great success. But it came with a lot of pain. I mean, actually, I've talked to Nick recently about it, and he's said, I wouldn't do it again because it was just so demanding and so difficult. And it was so risky. He could have lost his career there. I do remember seeing him in 1985 at a tournament in Kapalua that Mark Rolfing ran, the Lincoln Mercury at that time. And it was a pretty, hit and giggle tournament, but Nick was grinding. He was playing with Lee Trevino, and he was completely lost. He was hitting the ball all over the place. You would not have recognized, Nick Faldo compared to what he became. And Trevino was trying to, and Nick, when I brought it up to him, he remembered those days and said, "Oh yeah, that was dismal." And I thought, I was never going to come out of this hole, but he did it. And what I think sets Nick apart is that he was on a quest, an ultimate quest to be absolutely as great as he could be, and he gave everything possible to it. More than anybody else, we're seeing that a little bit now with Bryson. It's very compelling. We saw it with Tiger as well. And, Nick became such a well-rounded player and so great under pressure. The only thing he gave up was a bit of length. And so that was his one, I won't say Achilles heel, but the thing he had to overcome. And he overcame it with precision and hard work and tremendous mental discipline. And he won these majors just gutting them out. And yeah, some guys made mistakes coming down the stretch, but he was always there to realize and didn't ever make the big mistake. He really, I thought, was a model for what a professional is in terms of on the golf course, maximizing what you have. And he loves the game. He looks back on it now and says, gee, I could have been different, perhaps. I didn't want to be so self-absorbed, I guess, ideally, but it was the only way he could be as great as he was. And he should be extremely proud of what he accomplished.
Stuart, the age gap between you and him is right in an area that I find really interesting. The real stars of golf and their persona for the younger crop. You're about 14 years his junior. What was his vibe like when you're out there and you're trying to establish yourself?
Well, I certainly go back to when I first started playing golf as really day one. I was mid 80s. So, Greg Norman was our top player, and obviously there was many others behind him. But it was really Greg and Nick that when the Masters, the Australian Masters, was being played, which was early in the year in hot, dry conditions, much like what Muirfield is like this week, the crowds were unbelievable. And Greg had this brashness and this going for it. Nick was just methodical, relentless, just a totally different beast. And their clashes were phenomenal. But Nick really focused his whole career on he was zoned and zoomed in on how he was going to do it. And obviously the rebuild that Jaime mentioned was phenomenal. But you had your Nicklaus and Palmers decades earlier that had the family life, the balance, and all this sort of holistic look. But Faldo was like, I am going to do this and I'm going to do it my way. And he certainly had enough, as you would say, bastard in him that made it all possible. And the commitment to go from I can't play to rebuild my swing, which he got criticized for, and then his famous speech at the Open saying, I'd like to thank you all from the heart of my bottom, was really like he had a chip on his shoulder. And now he's morphed into now a commentator. It's an amazing transition, and Faldo's been really hammered in the press for 30 plus years, and now he's much more comfortable in his skin for sure.
You know, Jaime, to what Stuart said, and you made the point about the tabloids in the UK can be relentless and ruthless. And he dealt with that on a day-to-day basis. And this wasn't about just, him not hitting 15 of 18 greens in the third round of a major. I mean, it got personal, but yet who was the one that in the end, got to the line and is a member of the World Golf Hall of Fame emphatically? I remember in '96, that final major championship. Why is it that we all, whether it was you, Jaime, covering it, and Stuart, maybe somebody who's looking at it and going, well, Greg Norman is well out in front. It really doesn't matter who he's playing with. Why do we all think that there was something about Nick playing his way into that final group? There was a Hannibal Lecter quality to Nick Faldo. I thought he was around the lead. There was something that was just like, I am heartless. You know it. I know it. And I know that you know it. And I'll never forget a dear friend of mine who is a really fine amateur golfer said to me in that final round when he was really dismantling clinically Greg Norman, I think intellectually and also with the way he was hitting shots. His second on the 11th, my buddy said he could have hit that shot wearing a tuxedo and not send it to the cleaners to get pressed. That was how good he was that day. He eviscerated people with the flat line, Jaime. That debilitated others. Maybe he didn't hit it 300, but he was out there and he was heartless, and it worked.
Well, he was the scariest guy to have behind you because he was not going to make a mistake, and he was relentless. Someone like Trevino with Nicklaus, not that Jack didn't win his share, of course, but he was a scary opponent. And, I think Nick really took pride in getting to majors and being completely ready, mentally, physically, peaking beautifully. He didn't win a lot of other tournaments, relatively speaking, for a player as great as he was, but at majors he was at his very, very best. And that Sunday, he said, was in '96 was his greatest mental victory ever because he didn't have the same game he'd had in the early '90s and late '80s. He did it with grit and being able to handle the moment. And when he hit that second shot on 13 with a 2-iron, that to him was like the ultimate of everything he'd ever done right then in that moment, and he kind of won the tournament right there.
And of course, the split screen with Scott Hoke in '89. Nick shot 65 on that Sunday, and his expression when Hoke ran that putt by didn't even change. Of course it didn't.